Works? Okay. All right. Good morning. It's good to be here this morning. It's good to have everyone here with us. This is awesome. We're so pleased to have our guests here today, and this is pleasing to God. This is church, so this is awesome. Um, this is very encouraging for all of us here. And last week I wasn't here. I was in Wisconsin, and I was at a conference that I go to every year in Wisconsin. And, part of what I'm doing most of the time is attending the conference, but on my way home, I always see my best friend, who's been my best friend for 20 years, and his name is Steve. And Steve and I, have these, we kind of catch up. We see each other twice a year, and we catch up, have really good conversations, talk about stuff, life and marriage and parenting and all that stuff and things we're reading and thinking about. And we also play I guess I'll say friendly competition of golf, which is what we've been doing for years. And I do have a habit of reporting on that, and I will this time admit that I lost to Steve in golf. So there you go. It does happen every once in a while. But we did a match play. So it's, you record whoever wins a hole, and we were playing 27 holes. And after 18 of those, I was down by 3. And we are going into the final 9 holes. And on the first of the 9, I had this incredible putt, like 35 feet. And I made it. And I won the hole. And I won the next hole. And now I'm only down by 1. And there was this incredible mounting momentum building up. And I had it. And he knew that he was about to falter. And everyone knew that I was going to go forward and be victorious and be celebrated by all the people on the golf course in this great victory. Maybe a parade, I don't know. But what happened was that was according to my wisdom. That's what I thought was going to happen. It made sense to me that I was on the path to victory after this. That momentum was going to continue, and I would just dominate the situation and be victorious over my best friend Steve. But that wasn't the case. He was able to surprisingly come back and hold that lead, and I was defeated. So that was a surprise to me. I didn't expect that. There's a lot of surprises that we come across day by day. Sometimes they're meaningless surprises, like on a golf course or a soccer field or something like that. Sometimes they're in church. This morning, I had a special surprise, something I wasn't expecting. I opened the little communion cup, and in it, I had a small piece of bread, and next to it was his little brother, also another piece of bread. So I didn't eat it just so that I could show it to you guys, but I got 2. How many times have you ever had 2 in the communion cup? Yeah? Okay, we got some back here. But that doesn't happen every day, right? You think that you know what's going to happen in life. You think you know what's going to happen at church. But every once in a while, there is a surprise. Something happens that you're not expecting. That's what this text is about today that we're going to be looking at in 1 Corinthians. But first, I want to tell you about my favorite part of the conference that I attended. My good friend named Mike Casey did a presentation, and he was one of the presenters. And for as long as I have known him, and many years prior to that, he's been working on trying to understand this big fancy word called atonement. Atonement. Trying to understand what it means, trying to be able to grasp it and explain it to other people, in particular his children and his grandchildren. What is God doing on the cross? And he did a presentation, and in the program, the schedule of the conference, it said Mike Casey, Atonement. And when you have a bunch of like preachers and church leaders coming to a conference, and you're like and you read in the program atonement, you're like, okay, well, we all know what this one's going to be about. We know what he's going to say. We know the verses he's going to use. And you kind of just, endure it a little bit. But Mike Casey, I knew what he was talking about, but I think that's what other people are going into it thinking. Mike, my good friend, he's a retired minister, still not retired carpenter. He's in his 60s, just a really great guy. And he did something that no one's ever seen before. He surprised everyone by talking about atonement from a text that is never used when talking about atonement. He went to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. That's where we're going to be this morning. I'm not going to reproduce Mike's presentation to you, but I just want us to appreciate how brilliant his approach was, because in his mind, 1 Corinthians 1 is actually the lens through which all other verses on atonement ought to be read. This is the gateway to understanding what God is doing on the cross and how that affects us. So we're just going to spend a couple minutes in 1 Corinthians 1. One of the things that Mike did at the end of his presentation, I'm going to do it at the beginning, is he showed us all a picture. And it wasn't a PowerPoint slide. He actually had a gigantic frame with this framed picture in it. But it's also available on the internet, and I want to show it to you today. Maybe we can even leave it up the whole time. Now, I know it's a little bit small on the PowerPoint. That's the best version I can find here. This painting was made in 1900, but it depicts a medieval king. A medieval king returning from battle in victory. Obviously, you can see the celebration, the crowds, the throwing of flowers. If you were able to get closer, you could see some of the people, the other warriors and the spears and that sort of thing as part of this picture. But this is a picture of what we're talking about today. Now, I want to ask you, what is happening in this picture? Go ahead and meditate on it for a second. What do you see happening? I'll give you a clue. The title of this piece of art is called The Two Crowns. The Two Crowns. And when you first look at it, I see one crown, right? Very prominent, center of the picture, in full color. There's the mighty king returning with the crown on his war horse, with his armor, and the townspeople are throwing a parade of celebration for him, admiring him. Everyone's looking at him with admiration. But it might take a while for your eyes to catch where the second crown is in this picture. There on the top right in the shadows is a second crown. And it's Jesus hanging on a cross. Jesus hanging on a cross. And if you were able to get a little bit closer to the picture and see this king's eyes, you can see his eyes, looking up to his left at that crown and at that cross. And the question the artist wants to pose is why? Why is he looking at that picture? And there's even a bit of concern, a bit of worry in the eyes of the king. Nobody else sees it. Nobody else sees this cross. Not a focal point of anyone else in the picture except the man who is the representation of power and prestige and authority, who has the crown. But he is looking at a different crown with some concern. We can leave that up as long as you want for the whole sermon. I think it's worth meditating on as we look at this text. Sometimes maybe PJ wants to show the text of 1 Corinthians 2, but I'll let you guys work that out. But there's something important happening in 1 Corinthians 1, chapter 1, verses 18 and following, and it's about this right here. It's about two crowns. He begins, Paul does, in verse 18. He says, "For the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. Now that right there is a really interesting phrase, to those who are being saved. How many times do you think about yourself as being saved versus saved? Paul talks about us in the present tense, that we're not just saved. He says we're being saved, in the process of being saved. That is a really interesting concept. I mean, I am so intrigued by that that's the title of this sermon, being saved. Now, in a couple verses later from this, he's going to talk about salvation in the past tense too. That's what we're used to saying when we're talking about salvation, being saved. It's already happened. But Paul also has in mind this thing that's called being saved. We're in the process, in the middle of it. It's ongoing. It's in the present. And we need to explore why that is and what that means. But for those of us who are being saved, it is the word of the cross, the power of God. For it is written, verse 19, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the cleverness of the clever I will set aside. This is a quotation from Isaiah 29. Why does Paul use that? Isaiah 29 is part of this set of prophecies that set in the context of the 8th century. King Hezekiah is on the throne. The world power is Assyria. Assyria is marching their army through all of the lands, decimating it, destroying it, all of the surrounding cities. That's happened to them. And the representative of the king of Assyria comes to Hezekiah and says, okay, you guys are next. And Hezekiah has a choice, and the people have a choice. What are we supposed to do? That's the context of this phrase. And two different things happen. The results depend upon where you see your source of wisdom. You see, some people wanted to either just give in and pay tribute to Assyria. Some people wanted Hezekiah to make an alliance with Egypt and maybe go against Assyria. But there's this prophet Isaiah who said, you know what I think you should do? I think you should just pray and trust God. And there's never been a more ridiculous, foolish phrase ever uttered to a king in the context of war. Just don't do anything and just trust in God, and maybe, and everything will work out. Don't act. Just trust in God. That is your action. And you can see how Isaiah would have been the laughing stock of all of the wise seers, the wise people who give advice to the king. This is so dumb. Why would you even entertain that thought? This is a king. We're in the middle of an approaching army. We either have to give in to him or make an alliance and fight against him. We're not just going to sit back. But if you know the story, you know that God shamed the wisdom of the wise. And the next morning, 85,000 soldiers woke up dead the next day, is the way I think it's phrased in the King James. That's a really funny way to say it. But 185,000 people woke up dead the next day because of Isaiah's faith in God. That was true victory in a way that no one ever would have anticipated. And Paul quotes that verse when he's talking here about the cross. I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the cleverness of the clever I will set aside. Where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? These are all the smart people, the people who know what's going on. Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not come to know God, God was well pleased through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. And here's the centerpiece. What is God doing on the cross? This is the question of that fancy word atonement, right? At the English word atonement, at one meant. Becoming one with someone. What is God doing on the cross? This was Mike's question. This is Paul's issue that he's trying to address here. He says in verse 21 that the world through its wisdom did not come to know God. But God was well pleased through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. Saving and save and knowing God are parallel here. They're the same thing. Salvation is knowing God. Knowing God is salvation. That's what God is trying to do on the cross. He's making a way for the world to know him because that's what he cares about. That's what he's interested in. He's seen the history of humanity as this slow progression into not knowing God, distancing ourselves from God, not being in relationship and communion with God. And that's what the cross is about. He sees that the world, in its built-up way of wisdom, is buffering itself against being able to know God. And God means to fix that. How? How does he make a way for the world, for us to know him? By allowing us to carry out our quote-unquote wisdom to its fatal end. And as he says in verse 27, to shame that wisdom and to show us what true wisdom and true power looks like. Look at verse 27. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong, the base things of the world and the despised. God has chosen the things that are not, so that he may nullify the things that are. How does he do this? He does it through a cross. How many of you have heard of a man named James Philip Barnes? Nobody. How many of you have heard of a person named Anthony Castillo Sanchez? Nobody. These are the two most recent people who have been executed by a death penalty in the United States. All right, I didn't know who they were either. I just had to look them up. One was a month ago, one was a week and a half ago. James and Anthony. Pick either one. Pick any of the 18 people who have been executed by a death penalty in the last year, calendar year. And first of all, imagine that maybe that weekend or a year later, you hear that someone has been executed, death penalty, James or Anthony or whoever, and they were actually innocent. Now that in itself is hard to believe, but sometimes that happens, right? Okay, we have an innocent man who was unjustly executed. Fine. Maybe they were. But then start telling someone that, imagine hearing that also this person isn't actually dead anymore. Okay, a little bit harder to believe. And then start to say that God actually vindicated them and raised them from the dead to show that they were innocent. Really difficult to believe. And then you say that God chose to do it this way to shame the wisdom of the quote-unquote wise. Now you see what the gospel sounds like to people. It sounds foolish. Now I know that the thing breaks down because Jesus lived a different life than these other people did that were executed via the death penalty. But you could see, we're so used to talking about Jesus and the cross and the resurrection. It actually is, you could see why it sounds foolish to some people, especially in the first century when it first happened. You're telling me that this guy that God chose to execute via the death penalty on the cross by the Roman soldiers, and that was his plan, and he did that so that we could have an easier time believing that he was the Son of God and that God vindicated him. How is that going to help us? And God's point, and Paul's point, is that God chose the very the end game of our wisdom and put it before our face and said, this is where your wisdom, my wisdom ends. This is the end result of it. That you take the Son of God the Messiah, and you kill him. Crucify him. Now, it's hard to believe because I think I'm pretty wise, and you probably do too, and we have a lot of good things going for us as human beings. You do think that about yourself, I mean, not about me. But God's saying there's something that you don't understand. There's a wisdom and a power, true wisdom and power that looks like foolishness, that looks like weakness. It's the difference between God's way and the world's way. And what does he mean by world and the wisdom of the world? He means, by world, he means value, meaning, purpose, and power. That's the way, the world has a certain way, and we condition ourselves culturally what is valuable, what is meaningful, what is our purpose here, and what true power looks like. And we see here the difference. What do you value? What is valued in the picture that we saw before? Valued something with prestige, something with force, something with military power. You remember Psalm 147 that we read today? That stuff doesn't impress God. God's not impressed by horses, the strength of horses. He's not impressed by the legs of a warrior. Remember that text? God's impressed by love and faithfulness. And I've never seen the show Game of Thrones, but I've seen a couple scenes of it. And there's one in particular I remember that has to do with this discussion of power. And the characters, whose names I don't know, are discussing what is true power and where does it come from. And there's different answers, but eventually, like the big answer is true power. The source of true power is, and the location of true power is wherever the people believe it is. That's worldly wisdom. That's worldly power. The secret about worldly power is it doesn't even exist. It's what we manifest and give to people. And that's what God is trying to help people know. And that's the secret that this king knows in the picture. He's sitting on a horse and he has armor and he has a crown. But he knows that's just fake. There is no true power, no true authority. That could be stripped from him in a second if the people don't think he's in power and authority anymore. It doesn't matter. He is recognizing, and his eyes are pointed at something that is totally antithetical to the worldly powers. And it is a man who is dying and dead on a cross, executed by death penalty. And somehow this king recognizes that that is true. That is where true value lies. That is where true meaning and purpose lie. That's where true power lie. Not in power based in fear and violence like this king is, but a power based in love and in sacrifice. And why is that? So that there is no room for us to boast in anything but in God. That's how Paul finishes this in verse 29. So that no one will boast before God. But by his doing, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, and righteousness, and sanctification, and redemption, so that just as it is written, let him who boasts, boast in the Lord. And so we see that salvation is about a paradigm shift, about what we think value is, what we think is important, where we think there is meaning, where we think there is purpose, where we think there is power. And God, let us let our own wisdom be carried out to its horrific end, resulting in Jesus dying on the cross, so that we could be face to face with that and realize that our wisdom is meaningless and that it has no value or purpose or true power, but that we see it in God. on the cross. That's where we get to know God. You don't get to know God through the power and prestige of the world, through, new cars and $1 million and, the accolades of fellow human beings. You don't find God in that race. You find God in love and in sacrifice. You find God in the cross. And Paul says that's the process of being saved. It's not something that we've already done that's in the past. This is a process. It's not easy, and every day we have to wake up and crucify the worldly wisdom that we're influenced to live by our culture. Because I'm tempted to put value in things of this world every single day. I'm tempted to find meaning and purpose in things that don't last every single day, and maybe you are too. I'm tempted to seek out worldly power every day and put my trust in that every day. And every day, Paul says, is about being saved. It's about putting those to death and about looking at the cross and saying, that is true love. That is true power. That is true value. That's where I get meaning and purpose. And when I model my life after that, that's when I will know God as he knows me. It's about learning every day to not boast in ourselves, but to boast in the Lord. So I leave you with that reflection this week. I encourage you to reflect on what it means to be saved, being saved, that we're all in that process of being saved. And at the very least, it's the process of learning to boast not in myself, but in the Lord. Let's stand and sing.